There's a lot of that going around.
Yeah, right.
Afternoon. I'll call this December 15th, 2022 meeting of the Air Pollution Control District of Santa Barbara County to order. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Director Lavanino.
Here.
Director King.
Here.
Director Clark. Director Perotti.
Here.
Director Osborne. Director Infante.
Here?
Director Williams. Director Rouse.
Here.
Director Capps. Director Nelson. Director Julian.
Here.
Director Patino. And Chair Hartman.
Here. Do we have a quorum?
Director
Okay.
Williams is on the phone.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Would you read any housekeeping information into the record, please?
Members of the public who wish to address the board today on any matter listed on the agenda or during the public comment period may do so in person at the Board of Supervisors hearing room in Santa Maria, the Planning and Development hearing room in Santa Barbara, or remotely via Zoom. To provide public comment in person, please deliver a speaker slip to the board clerk in Santa Maria, or if participating in Santa Barbara, please deliver a speaker slip to the designated APCD staff person on location. If participating via desktop, laptop, or smartphone, click on the raised hand button at the bottom of the screen. Or if participating via dial-in telephone, press *9. Thank you.
Thank you. Please stand and join me in the pledge. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
Liberty and justice for all.
And the first item of business is reconsideration of the circumstances of the COVID-19 state of emergency. Madam Clerk, would you read that into the record, please?
Item C, reconsider the circumstances of the COVID-19 state of emergency. C1, reconsider the circumstances of the COVID-19 state of emergency. C2, consider whether state or local officials continue to impose or recommend measures to promote social distancing. C3, find that the legislative body has reconsidered the circumstances of the state of emergency and that state or local officials continue to impose or recommend measures to promote social distancing. And C4, direct staff to continue to notice and hold hearings as remote hearings consistent with Government Code Section 54953E3.
Thank you. And do we have any council updates?
Madam Chair and Directors, I don't have an update since last time. I believe we went through a summary of the options, but the board can still make this finding today, and I'm happy to answer any questions about future upcoming changes.
Okay, so may I have a motion that we've reconsidered and we wish to continue meeting remotely for at least this meeting?
So move, Julian.
May I have a second?
Second, King.
Second King, third Caps, and we need a roll call vote.
Director Lavanino.
Aye.
Director King.
Aye.
Director Perotti.
Aye.
Director Infante.
Aye.
Director Williams.
Aye.
Director Rouse.
Aye.
Director Capps.
Aye.
Director Nelson.
No.
Director Julian.
Aye.
Director Patino.
Aye.
And Chair Hartman.
Aye.
Motion passes 10-1.
All right. The next item of business is closed session. Will the clerk please read that into the record?
Item D, closed session, public employee performance evaluation, Government Code Section 54957B1, title Air Pollution Control Officer.
All right. And so we'll adjourn to closed session, and then Madam Clerk, you'll explain how we all participate.
Yes, at this moment, all board members participating via Zoom, please log off of the open session Zoom meeting and log into the closed session Zoom meeting. Once closed session concludes, please log back into open session. Thank you.
And those of us present, do we stay here or do we go into the conference room?
Madam Chair, we're prepared in the conference room for closed
All right.
session.
Session, we're reconvening the December 15th meeting of the Santa Barbara County Air Pollution Control District. And Council Richardson, would you please report out?
Good afternoon. In closed session today, the Board of Directors conducted a public employee performance evaluation under Government Code Section 54957B1 for the Air Pollution Control Officer. The board took no reportable actions.
Thank you. Next item of business is the minutes of October 20th, 2022 and November 15th, 2022. Can I get a motion and a second for approval?
So moved.
Second, Patino. And Patino, second. And Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Director Lavadino,
Aye.
Director King,
Aye.
Director Clark,
Aye.
Director Perotti,
Aye.
Director Osborne,
Aye.
Director Infante,
Aye.
Director Williams, Director Rouse,
Aye.
Director Capps,
Aye.
Director Nelson,
Aye.
Director Julian,
Aye.
Director Patino,
Aye.
and Chair Hartman.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay, turning next to our administrative agenda, are there any items that any board members would like to pull? I would like to pull F4.
Yeah, and I'd like to pull F5, King.
All right. Any others? And Madam Clerk, any members of the public?
We have no comments from the members of the public.
Okay, would you read F4 into the record, please?
Item F4, consideration of salary merit increase for Air Pollution Control Officer Erin Arlen Janae. Consider approval of a salary merit increase for Air Pollution Control Officer Erin Arlen Janae. For purposes of discussion, the board letter proposes a 3% salary merit increase.
And I would like to move that we continue that until January 19th, 2023. May I get a second?
Second, Julian.
And Madam Clerk?
Director Lavadino,
Aye.
Director King,
Aye.
Director Clark,
Aye.
Director Perotti,
Aye.
Director Osborne,
Aye.
Director Infante,
Aye.
Director Williams, Director Rouse,
Aye.
Director Capps,
Aye.
Director Nelson,
Aye.
Director Julian,
Aye.
Director Patino,
Aye.
and Chair Hartman.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Madam Clerk, would you read F5 into the record, please?
Administrative item F5, old car buyback program contract with Santa Maria Recycling Center. Consider recommendations as follows. Approve and authorize the chair to 1, execute the attached professional service contract AP 222301 between the Santa Barbara County Air Pollution Control District and Santa Maria Recycling Center for the old car buyback program in the amount not to exceed $500,000 and with a term of December 15th, 2022 to August 20th, 2025. And 2, approve and authorize the Air Pollution Control Officer in accordance with the contract listed in recommendation 1 to issue spending authorization not to exceed $100,000, section 29.
Director King.
Ma'am, thank you. And I would like to just maybe ask council that, can this contract be modified prior to any further approval of this contract that we have before us? And I know I'm the new kid on the block, and I did read this in its entirety. And the issue that I'm having with this particular contract is the way it's written. Basically, if you look at page 11, this contract says that basically the car has to be in good working order, has to have its air pollution. Bottom of page 12, it says it has to have all doors in place and basically all the safety features. So as a former law enforcement officer, basically as a traffic officer, I believe that the intention of this particular document is that we get gross polluters off the road. And trust me, I have been I have pulled them over many times with blue smoke coming out of the back of the car. Now, in my mind, having, consideration for what are we trying to do? And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get gross polluters off the road. But after reading this particular document, it says that it has to basically have smog checks, has to be registered. There's other provisions in here as well. And then another thing that kind of didn't set well with me is at top of page 12. It says, if a vehicle is volunteered for retirement within 60 days of the next requirement, smog check inspection, blah, blah, blah. And then we go to page 14, and it says that this vehicle someone will pay $1,000 for this vehicle. And then number B on the top of page 14, it says a contractor must wait a minimum of 10 days before submitting report of the vehicle to be dismantled and notice of acquisition, blah, blah, blah. And then it says, someone within that 10-day period could come in and buy this vehicle, and then at least another 7 days during the extension. This is a subsection C on the top of 14. Shall arrange an interested person to examine the vehicle, et cetera, and then they can turn around and sell that vehicle. And then D3 says, shall not claim any emissions restrictions for that vehicle. So if somebody could maybe Reader's Digest to me how this is getting those gross polluters off the road, to me that sounds like we're just basically doing a pass-through, because if the contractor obtains this vehicle from someone, they're to turn around. If they destroy the vehicle, the $1,000, we get charged the $1,000 plus we give them $250. However, they can take that vehicle that we were intending to get off the road and turn around and sell it. So if somebody can bring me up to speed on how this makes any sense.
Ms. Richardson? Chair Hartman and Director King, I believe these requirements may come directly from the Carl Moyer program, but one thing we could do if we wanted to trail this item while the board considers the other items, I can confirm if all those are coming directly from the state language, in which case we wouldn't have likely ability to modify them, or if it's something a little different.
Yeah, I understand that. And that's, to me, it's like, and I don't know how much you guys know about cars, but as a kid, out of necessity, I worked on cars myself. And there's something that if somebody has, let's say their catalytic converter stolen off their car, wrecking yards cannot sell any exhaust products to someone from that wrecking yard. So basically, if you got your catalytic converter stolen, now you have to go out and buy a $700 or $800 catalytic converter to put back on your car. Well, if that person doesn't want to do that, maybe they drive that car around polluting the atmosphere without that catalytic converter because it's too expensive for them to buy one. So in my simple way of thinking, to me, that's the kind of cars you want to get off the road. If you're going to be concerned about your air quality, you don't want somebody driving around in a car without a catalytic converter because they can't afford it. So to me, that's the kind of vehicle under this program that you would want to take off the street to never have on the highway again. So if we can move this down the road so I can get some further information regarding this, and if what I was just advised by council, that if this is the verbiage from the state, then it is what it is.
Yeah, this is the verbiage from the state. There was a piece of legislation for voluntary accelerated vehicle retirement program that CARB then worked from a legislative point of view into their Carl Moyer guidelines. And it requires everything that's included in this grant contract. And that's what we built it off of, including the based on car enthusiast pressure at the state level when the legislation was built for car enthusiasts wanting to make sure that collectibles remain available for those individuals. That's why you have that 10-day window built into this. But it wouldn't be double dipping. We wouldn't be paying the money and then the dismantlers get an additional money. Those vehicles, if they are sold, the funds are returned back to the Air District. And as far as having them smog checked and with all of the equipment working, that also is part of the VAVAR regulation that we're limited to. I know the Bureau of Automotive Repair has other car scrapping programs that aren't as rigorous as what we have to abide by. But what we have included here is directly from CARB's guidelines and the regulation that allows us to even fund these purchases.
Director King, you raised some excellent points. What do you think after hearing that?
Well, I think your hands are tied at that point. If this is what the state is required, and this is the only way that we can facilitate that. And I understand about the classic cars because I have a lot of friends that rebuild classic cars to showroom quality, and I can understand their concern, but I almost would hope that we could have modified this a little bit to take in some vehicles that were gross polluters, and trust me, I have pulled over plenty of them. But having said that, if it is what it is, then I would be willing to put this back on consent.
So, Ms. Arlen Janae, is this something we can work through with the legislature?
You'd have to have a new piece of legislation approved in order for CARB to change their guidelines. This is the same contract that we have with 3 other dismantlers that we currently have operating the old car buyback throughout the county. In this instance, we had one company that was done with business. They were going to go on and do other things in their career. And the Santa Maria company that's purchased or wants to move forward with old car buyback is just starting with a similar contract that we have with all the other dismantlers in our region.
Okay, so I think we've got the administrative agenda to approve. May I have a motion for approval?
King second.
How about King motion? And
Yeah, I will make a motion to approve the.
okay, and second from Director Capps. Madam Clerk?
Director Levanino,
Aye.
Director King,
Aye.
Director Clark,
Aye.
Director Parodi,
Aye.
Director Osborne,
Aye.
Director Infante,
Aye.
Director Williams,
Aye.
Director Rouse,
Aye.
Director Capps,
Aye.
Director Nelson,
Aye.
Director Julian,
Aye.
Director Patino,
Aye.
and Chair Hartman.
Aye,
Motion passes unanimously.
Chair Hartman, can I?
of course.
Yeah, I was glad to go move forward with the balance of the agenda there, but I just also wanted to thank Director King for bringing up those points. You know, some of us that are on these boards for a long time, we start to get used to some of these passing some of these contracts and grants, and I really enjoy having new members like Director Capps and Director King on here because it's fresh eyes, because it makes it all better for staff and your colleagues to be challenged. So I appreciate those questions. They're great questions. They're questions I should have asked myself as well. But I wanted to really encourage Director King and other new directors to continue to ask those questions. It really does make us all better. Don't ever hesitate to do that. You're serving your community well.
Absolutely.
Appreciate
Okay, director's report.
All right, I have a few items in my director's report. First off, I'm going to put a spotlight on our Community Advisory Council. There were a couple items, including minutes and a change to the bylaws in the admin agenda. But I also wanted to remind all of you to appoint representatives. You each get 2 representatives to the CAC. And right now, so that would make 26 CAC members total. Right now, we currently have 17 CAC members and 9 vacant positions. So what I thought I could do is, following up on this meeting, I'll work with each of the board members who has a vacant position, just reminding you have a vacant position, helping if there's anything I could do to help fill those positions. We have our next meeting in February, and in 2023, it's going to be a busy CAC year. So having your voice heard on that forum is desirable.
Okay,
And then the next item, I wanted to give an update on Central Coast Agriculture. This is an item that we've discussed a few times in the past under our NOV report. After numerous attempts through our mutual settlement process, we were unable to reach an agreed upon settlement penalty with CCA for the 17 violations for operating the diesel engines at 2 locations on Santa Rosa Road. Rather than incurring large cost and resource demands through Litigation, the district has referred all 17 violations to the district attorney's office, who is actively working to resolve this case. The Air District provided all detailed background information on the violations to the DA's office and will keep your board apprised when the DA settlement efforts have been concluded. And then the last item I wanted to report on was the Santa Barbara City Harbor Commission Subcommittee on December 1. Tim Mitro and Alex provided a presentation to this subcommittee on air quality impacts of cruise ships that visit the harbor. This was at the request of the subcommittee. The meeting was attended by city waterfront staff as well as a packed house of the public. At Anchorage and transit emissions for a typical cruise ship visit were evaluated and compared to a similar scenario using passenger cars. The presentation also compared cruise ship emissions to the district's overall emissions inventory. Leading up to this subcommittee meeting, we were able to get on the horn with CARB. We had a meeting with CARB staff the same day on December 1 to discuss strategies and mitigation measures to reduce at Anchorage emissions. It was a very productive meeting, and we're going to be following up with CARB staff on different tools and resources that we may be able to utilize locally. We're actually reviewing CARB's interim evaluation report. They have this is associated with ocean-going vessels at berth regulation. We will be evaluating this report and participating in their public workshop. It's tentatively scheduled to happen in January, and then following that, they'll be bringing a presentation to the CARB board as well. So we will stay actively engaged on that. And I believe that concludes my APCO report.
Thank you. And on a more personal item, I believe you participated in the national cross-country race. Could you please report the results of that?
And Bob, this one's to motivate you.
Thank you.
So on Saturday, and I don't know if you knew, it was very stormy on Saturday and up in Golden Gate Park. I was able to win a medal for finishing second place in 55 and older division.
This is a nationally competitive race.
Yeah, it was National Club Cross Country Championship. It was very much a cross country race with all of the elements: the rain, the wind, the mud, the hills, the grass. I surprised myself coming back after 2 years of a broken ankle. I was just extremely happy, and you can do it, Bob. You're going to have this for what is it? Free stroke or what is it?
Butterfly.
Butterfly.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So this is to motivate everyone.
It's
to
an
keep
athletic
keeping
competition.
where you're at on the age scale. It was a 6K, so 3.85. Yeah.
Supervisor, Director Nelson.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Director Jeanette and I have talked about our masters competitions, and it's always great to have you as a role model for me here and motivation. I did have a couple questions about your director's report, though.
Please.
One was, I think I know the answer to this, but community advisory council members don't necessarily have to live in your jurisdiction.
Nope. They
Okay.
can live. They don't even have to live in the county.
Right. So that's
Oh.
so everybody that needs to appoint somebody, you can look elsewhere if you don't have some that talent within your community. Of course, it's great to have
Yep.
broad community support. So getting somebody from each community would be ideal, but you can go outside of that.
Yep.
And then the question about the CCA, referring that to district attorney, does that, I mean, have we delegated all of our authority as far as the APCD is concerned with that? So it would never come back to us. It's now in their hands completely.
As far as resolving
the fees
and reaching
fines?
a settlement, yes.
Correct. Okay.
And then once it's reached, there's a share of the settlement, the total settlement that's secured.
Okay. Thank you.
And that is a criminal action or a civil action?
Chair Hartman and directors, we don't know. They could elect to go either direction.
Okay. Any other directors have questions about the executive director's report?
Chair Hartman, I'm not seeing any raised hands on Zoom.
Okay, next is public comment for items not on today's agenda, but within our jurisdiction. Any members of the public want to comment?
Chair Hartman, we did not receive any public comments, and there are no raised hands on Zoom.
Okay, moving to discussion item number 1. Would you read that into the record, please?
Discussion item I1, appreciation for departing board members. present service award of appreciation to Second District Supervisor Greg Hart, Buellton Mayor Holly Sierra, Buellton Councilmember Ed Andrezek, Santa Maria Councilmember Etta Waterfield, and Solving Mayor Charlie Uhrig.
I'll keep this very brief. It's unfortunate our timing for recognizing departing board members didn't line up well with our regular meeting schedule, election results, and when board members would be leaving their positions. We're sorry that they cannot be present to receive recognition for their dedication and service to the Air District. Cumulatively speaking, these 5 members provided over 30 years of time to the Air District, and we accomplished a lot during that 10 years. So we will be sending each of them a departing Yeti mug that has our logo on it, as well as their name and the time when they served on our board. I'll also be including a thank you letter for what they provided to the local community. So
Terrific.
yeah.
Did any directors want to speak to this? Madam Clerk?
Chair Hartman, we have no raised hands on Zoom.
Okay, and do we have any public comment?
We did not receive any public comment on this item.
All right, and we don't need a vote on this. So the next item is number 2 on our agenda. Would you read that into the record, please, Madam Clerk?
Discussion item I2, adoption of the 2022 ozone plan. Consider recommendations as follows. 1, hold a public hearing to receive public testimony on the 2022 ozone plan and addendum to the final environmental impact report for the 2010 Clean Air Plan. And 2, adopt a resolution containing the following action items. 2A, find that prior to approval of the 2022 ozone plan, board members have reviewed and considered the addendum to the final environmental impact report for the 2010 Clean Air Plan with the final environmental impact report for the 2010 Clean Air Plan. 2B, adopt the California Environmental Quality Act findings, including that subsequent environmental review is not required because none of the conditions in CEQA guidelines section 15162 have occurred. 2C, adopt the 2022 ozone plan. And 2D, authorize the Air Pollution Control Officer to transmit the 2022 ozone plan to the California Air Resources Board and do all other acts necessary and proper to obtain the approval of the 2022 ozone plan.
This afternoon, we're going to have a tag team presentation. Jim Frederickson, the supervising planning division supervisor, I apologize, will start us off, and Tim Mitro, the air quality engineer in the planning division, will be joining him. They both were extremely involved as we worked through the CAC on the review and recommendations for this plan. So please take it away.
Good afternoon, Chair Hartman, board members. As Aaron mentioned, Tim and I are going to provide you with an overview of our 2022 ozone plan. We're going to walk through it chapter by chapter. To be respectful of your time at this late hour, we're going to streamline our presentation quite a bit. And so if you have questions as we go along, feel free to jump in. We're going to kind of skip through a lot of our talk. So if there's things that you want to know, please jump in. First, we're going to start with the structure of the plan. Excuse me. This structure is very similar to what we've used in past ozone plans. For brevity, we're going to move on to the next slide. We're going to walk through all these chapters individually. Since this is an ozone plan, we wanted to briefly explain what ozone is and how it is formed. Ground level ozone is a gas that is formed when oxides of nitrogen and reactive organic gases photochemically react in the presence of sunlight and heat, especially during April to October, which are the warmer months of the year. NOx emissions are typically generated from the combustion of fossil fuels and vehicles, equipment, and industry. ROC emissions are typically generated from incomplete fossil fuel combustion, solvents, and aerosols. So when we breathe ground level ozone, it can affect our respiratory, cardiovascular, and central nervous systems, especially in children and the elderly. Both the California Air Resources Board and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency have established ozone standards to protect public health. Next slide. So if you're wondering why we wrote this plan, the plan is mandated by the California Clean Air Act of 1988. which required each air district designated as non-attainment of the state ozone standard, such as Santa Barbara County, to develop a plan to attain the state ozone standard by the earliest practicable date. In response to state requirements, the air district wrote the first attainment plan in 1991. California Health and Safety Code requires us to update the ozone plan every 3 years with new information and analysis that demonstrates progress, assesses program effectiveness, and evaluates emission reduction strategies to help us attain the state ozone standard. So the 2022 ozone plan will satisfy this triennial update requirement. So Tim is now going to discuss chapter 2 and our local air quality.
All right, thank you, Jim. So chapter 2 of the plan tells the story of how air quality has improved throughout the years. Back in the early 1990s, we were getting about 100 exceedances of the 8-hour standard. But then as new regulations were adopted over time, we can see that that exceedance count has dropped to near zero levels within the last few years. And these air quality improvements were still occurring while the county experienced about a 20% increase in population. Chapter 2 also goes into detail about the designation criteria that the California Air Resources Board goes through to actually consider when a county is in attainment. So when the California Air Resources Board is making this determination, they're only looking at the last 3 years worth of data as shown in the red box. And in those 3 years, we had 8 separate exceedance days. The one exceedance in 2019 was when we were having hot weather and southeast transport winds. The 6 exceedances in 2020 were all influenced by wildfires occurring in Northern and Central California. And the 2021 exceedance was when it was another heat wave with very stagnant air conditions. So these meteorological conditions and events can easily lead to high pollutant concentrations and unhealthy air at one or more of the monitoring stations within the county. And so far in 2022, we have had 0 exceedances. So that's why we're in the process right now of being designated non-attainment transitional by the state. So moving on to chapter 3, that's where we're providing an updated emission inventory for both ROC and NOx, which are the precursor pollutants that help form ozone. And so the emission inventory is broken up into 4 major categories. We got stationary sources, area-wide sources, on-road vehicles, and other mobile sources. And since marine shipping continues to be a large contributor to the local emission inventory, we still continue to break that out from the other mobile source category. So these are the man-made sources that can readily be planned for and regulated. And so, the inventory shown in the pie chart does not include the natural sources of emissions. As we just saw on the last page, 6 out of the 8 exceedances were from wildfires. So natural sources are still important, but if you're interested in some information on that, we compile that in the end in Appendix B at the very end of the plan. Anyhow, both ROC and NOx emissions from the major categories were calculated for the base year of 2018, which is the most recent and thoroughly reviewed inventory year by both the state and the local air district. And by using an emission forecasting tool, we can take that base year data and project it into the future. Specifically, we looked at years 2025, 2035, and 2045. So this table sort of summarizes the projections from the 2018 base year to the projection year of 2045. And you can see some of the major trends that are happening in all the different source categories over time. Stationary sources and area-wide sources are going to remain, relatively stable, but you can see that drastic drop in both the on-road vehicle emissions and other mobile equipment. And so these projections are looking at just the current regulations that are on the books today, what those regulations will do to these future inventories. As for marine shipping, there are going to be some fluctuations over the next 20 or 30 years. We are expecting increased container ship traffic to the ports of LA and Long Beach, which is why we are seeing an increase in the ROC emissions in the marine shipping sector. But as some of the older ships are retired and newer ships are put into service. Those newer ships are going to be using Tier 3 engines, which is why you're going to be seeing a NOx reduction in the marine sector over time. So overall, the total emission inventory for both ROC and NOx are expected to decrease based off of the local, statewide, and federal regulations that are adopted today.
Excuse me.
Mhm.
Chair Hartman.
Sure, go
Yeah,
ahead.
we can stay on the slide here for a second because you asked us to stop you while we're going through the presentation. So ERCs, what's
ERC stands for emission reduction credits. And so that comes into play for just in case we have a stationary source shut down their emissions. Often they will bank the emission reduction credits. So that way, when we have a new large stationary source want to be installed in the county, if they're over a certain threshold, they have to use the emission reduction credits to be built within the county. So it is a new source review requirement. And based off of federal guidance, they do recommend incorporating that into the projections, just assuming that all the emission reduction credits are used.
so the baseline is 2018, there's none, no ERCs.
We do have emission reduction credits in our bank currently, but they're not actual emissions at this point in the 2018 base year. But in the future, some large stationary source could want to be installed in Santa Barbara County. And so we are assuming in this situation that all of the emission reduction credits are used.
And to stay with the marine shipping for a moment, because that's the really alarming number there, is to see that go up by such a large percentage. Is that taking consideration at all with some of the discussions about actually doing some like seaports off the Central Coast? I mean, I know that's like a discussion that Reach is involved in, and is making sure that there's potential ports either in Morro Bay or here in Santa Barbara County for some of the wind energy, as well as the potential commercial space opportunities. Is that factored into your considerations here?
So the marine shipping sector is looking at the larger ocean-going vessels that are, greater than 300 gross tons. And so the majority of that is the large container ships that are coming. If we do have smaller projects, still a large project off of the Morro Bay, they may be using ships to go and service the equipment that would still be covered under most likely the commercial hovercraft regulation for the smaller boats. And they would still have some larger workboats, that would still be covered under this projection.
So we're not anticipating any major impacts from those types of projects?
I think that would still be going through the land use review project to actually look at that specific, increase from that project.
Okay.
So,
right. Thank you.
So we were talking about the local measures, and so that's where we're going to go into Chapter 4, which we're calling them the stationary source control measures, what we as the Air District have regulatory authority over. So since 1991, we have adopted over 30 different stationary source control measures, and these have reduced the emissions from internal combustion engines, boilers, water heaters, all the different oil and gas operations within the county. And so historically, we have been evaluating all these rules that we've been adopting under the every feasible measure analysis. And this is where we look at the rules that have already been adopted in the other air districts, evaluate the magnitude of the emission reductions and the cost effectiveness of adopting them locally, and then also assess whether they can be effectively implemented within Santa Barbara County. So we performed this analysis once again for 2022, and we found that there are no new measures that would be effective to implement at this point in time in the next 3-year period. We've already got a lot of the low-hanging fruit, and so now we're trying to focus a lot of our efforts elsewhere.
Hold on one second.
Sorry.
And the slides online aren't following your slide yet. All right, looks like it's working now.
Okay.
Slow down, Tim.
Okay, so I guess that's
Chair Hartman.
Please, yes.
Can you explain that, what you mean by no new
measures? I just want to understand.
So under the 2022 ozone plan mandate, we have to adopt every feasible control measure for stationary sources. So there are, as we saw in chapter 3, a lot of different emission sources. And there are potential rules such as like a boiler rule or an internal combustion engine rule, or a lot of the coating and solvent rules that we could, review and, adopt to get emission reductions from the stationary sources within the county. So other larger air districts like the South Coast Air Quality Management District in the Bay Area, they're in extreme non-attainment for, well, the South Coast is in extreme non-attainment for ozone and Bay Area is in moderate non-attainment, but they always have to look at all the potential emission reductions and get as much as possible because they're in oftentimes a worse situation as us. We're only getting a few exceedances per year. They're getting, dozens more. So when we're going through this analysis, we see what those other larger air districts have done. And we understand our stationary sources because we have permits with a lot of them. And so what we do is we evaluate is if we apply that same rule locally about how much emission reductions would we be getting. And so we perform that analysis, and a lot of the rules that could be implemented would only be getting about 1 to 3 different tons per year of emission reductions.
And also keep in mind that our stationary source on the overall pie is 14% of the total emissions.
I see.
Mobile sources really are the big bang
big-
for the
okay.
buck.
Yeah.
Bang for the buck. So the more that the state and the federal agencies can do to reduce those emissions, the greater benefit we'll have here.
Excellent. So doubling down on what the current measures on stationary rather than adding.
Yeah. That's
Right.
Okay.
That's not to say that there aren't going to be any stationary source measures, because we are still actively having to follow the Assembly Bill 617 best available retrofit control technology
Okay.
requirements. So commonly referred to as BARCT, or what we will refer to it as. And so that still is, we have 3 BARCT assessments that still need to be evaluated in the upcoming 2023 calendar year. So those could be going through as potential rules, but they would only apply to the largest industrial sources within the county, not countywide.
Thanks for the explanation. Helpful.
Chair Hartman, Director Lavanino has a comment.
Of course.
More of a question. So always with, when we look at that piece of the pie where marine shipping's 42%, and you look like they could be the cause of doubling our OCs by 2045. Do we track activity? I'm just curious. It just seems like now when I drive on the 101 between Santa Maria and Santa Barbara, I look out and on the horizon, I just see, it's like the 405. They're just lined up. And I'm wondering if we track that activity on a yearly basis or a monthly basis, or do we track it at all?
So for marine shipping, it is something that we have the privilege of tracking a lot of the container ship movements because we participate in the vessel speed reduction program. So through our partnership with NOAA, we do have access to a lot of the AIS data, automatic identification system. And so that pretty much means every single ship that is traveling within the channel or south of the Channel Islands, we can see where they're at and how fast they're going. So that is something that we do look at on an annual basis. In this emission inventory that is shown, it is using the 2020 AIS data. We are really proud because just recently, within the last year, the California Air Resources Board updated the ocean-going vessel methodology and emission inventory to show these numbers. And that was something that's been in the works for quite some time because the previous methodology was done back in 2011, and it was using much older data where the ships were speeding through. But now we're seeing a lot of the ships slow down. And yes, we still are we commented on the projections for marine shipping as the state's always looking to see what is reasonable. And it's something that they may reevaluate in the upcoming years as well.
Have we ever done any sort of scientific study on how much further out they would have to pass where it would not affect us onshore? Does that make any sense?
It does make sense. And so right now, the California Air Resources Board is relying on a lot of their assessments that they did back in the 70s and 80s that was still showing that, based off the prevailing wind patterns, that a lot of the pollution that is, 25 to 50 nautical miles offshore will still eventually mix in, and some of it will get onshore and affect the local coastal communities. So,
Okay, that makes
yeah,
sense.
it is something of it. It does still include south of the Channel Islands.
Okay. So just I'll add my editorial since I always do on this. This for me, for our new folks, is my big bone of contention is that the vast majority of the pollution that affects out of the purview of APCD. So we can't control the marine shipping and we can't control the 101 or any mobile sources. And what we end up doing is really chasing that decimal point on the fixed sources to the point where, we have to regulate very heavily on the stuff that we can control because, as you can see from these pie charts, most of it's out of our control, unfortunately. But thanks for the info.
And just to add to that, I think that's why it's such an important part of my job and the job of the Air District to secure as many grant funds as possible to get those emission reductions, voluntary emission reductions, as well as working on the incentive program like the vessel speed reduction program to get folks to reduce emissions in more of the carrot approach versus the regulatory approach.
And you've done a great job of that. Thank you.
Okay, so I just have one more slide before I give it presentation back over to Jim. And so this is chapter 5, where we're going to go into more detail about the transportation control measures, or TCMs. And so a TCM is a program that encourages the traveling public to use efficient modes of transportation, which would reduce vehicle miles traveled and air emissions. So for every triennial plan update, SB-CAG helps us compile the local data and informs us of any new projects or activities that would be categorized as a TCM. And in chapter 5, one of the highlighted topics revolves around the graph shown on the screen, where the graph is showing VMT over time as compares to population. And so with this triennial update, we're now seeing some of the more recent data, specifically the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic in that calendar year of 2020. So county-wide, VMT decreased by approximately 15% in 2020 due to the effects of the pandemic. And a lot of that may be due to just, more people telecommuting. There's been a lot of changes in both industry and society. And so as more data becomes available, this is something that, SB-CAG will be evaluating the trends over time and making sure that they can diligently analyze the data sets and then find ways to further reduce the county-wide VMT. And over to you, Jim.
Okay, back to grant and incentive programs. And apparently board member Lavanino was reading my notes, but I'm going to go ahead and read through them anyways. So back on slide 6, Tim had showed the emission inventory pie chart. In that chart, 42% of the emissions are from marine shipping, 13% are from on-road mobile, and 17% are from other mobile source categories. So 72% of the total ROC and NOx emissions came from these mobile sources that are not regulated locally. Rather, they're regulated by the California Air Resources Board and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, along with other entities such as the International Marine Organization. To help achieve mobile source emission reductions, we've had to be very innovative locally. For the past 35 years, the Air District has used grant funds to encourage private companies, government agencies, and the general public to voluntarily replace older, high-polluting vehicles, engines, and equipment with newer, cleaner, near-zero, and zero-emission technologies. The results have been highly successful. During these 35 years, we've expended over $50 million to permanently reduce many thousands of tons of ozone-forming emissions countywide. We currently have 6 project categories where we replace engines, equipment, and vehicles. These include ag water pump engines, alternative fuel vehicle infrastructure, marine vessel engines, off-road equipment, on-road trucks and transit buses, and school buses. Next slide. So the Air District currently has 4 active incentive programs. The Vessel Speed Reduction Program began 8 years ago and has consistently grown each year with increases in the number of companies and number of vessels that participate in the Blue Whales, Blue Skies program. This program provides both financial and international recognition awards to shipping companies whose fleets reduce their speed to 10 knots or less through VSR zones, such as the Santa Barbara Channel. Over the past 29 years, the old car buyback program has successfully scrapped over 8,000 cars and reduced an estimated 960 tons of emissions. However, the program has slowed post-COVID with the higher demand and higher price for used cars. Thus, higher incentive amounts will be needed for the program to succeed in the years ahead. We have completed 2 years of our popular wood smoke reduction program, providing incentives to replace 133 wood-burning fireplaces with a cleaner alternative. This fiscal year, the California Air Resources Board has budgeted $5 million statewide for air districts to operate a wood smoke reduction program. Our air district expects to apply and receive state funds in early 2023, which will allow us to launch a 3rd year of the wood smoke reduction program. For the past 2 years, our Landscape Equipment Electrification Fund, or LEAF program, has provided incentives to commercial landscape businesses, public entities, and nonprofits to purchase new electric landscape equipment and battery packs, along with financial incentives to scrap their old gasoline equipment. This fiscal year, we were awarded $850,000 from the California Air Resources Board to launch a 3rd year of the LEAF program this spring. Once the California Air Resources Board adopts changes to their landscape equipment guidelines in early 2023, we'll be able to get this going. Next slide. Chapter 7 primarily connects 8 key points from all the previous chapters and summarizes how the Air District plans to attain the state ozone standard. The Air District will continue to efficiently implement these existing programs that have helped us obtain the progress we've achieved so far, with the goal to provide us with clean air that we will attain and eventually maintain the state ozone standard. Next slide. So that sums up each of the 7 chapters of the 2022 ozone plan. As part of the plan development process, Air District staff met with the Community Advisory Council on 3 separate occasions over the past 8 months to discuss the contents of the plan and to incorporate any of their comments. At the end of the last CAC meeting in October, we received a unanimous recommendation that your board of directors adopt the 2022 ozone plan. Next slide. So the staff recommendation is listed on this slide, which includes the necessary CEQA addendum and findings, the adoption of the 2022 ozone plan, and the authorization for the Air Pollution Control Officer to transmit the 2022 ozone plan to the California Air Resources Board. And here's Tim and my faded email addresses. That's our contact information. We're happy to answer any questions.
So any questions from the board? I have a few, but do we have anybody participating by Zoom?
We have no raised hands on Zoom.
So I have a couple of questions. The Goleta City Council and Mayor Perotti recently held a forum on the airport, and a lot of questions came up on what is the level of pollution. I see from this that airplanes are with other mobile sources and it's 17%. But this is for NOx. I just wondered, particulates, or do we have much information about the level of pollution that comes from the airport, or is that something we could get?
I was meeting with Robert Nesbitt last week, right after the special meeting, and got a summary of the discussion that was there and how the air quality impacts were brought up, but were pushed off to a later discussion. It was my goal to reach out to the team that's evaluating that and seeing what resources we could provide. Air quality impacts from airports, other than from a land use decision, are outside of our regulatory jurisdiction, but we can
track it or monitor it, or can say how much
get more information. I don't know specifically if it's for the Goleta or Santa Maria Airport. They probably do from a state level, just allocate it across the state. But we could look and see what we have. Do you have more?
Yeah, and so the California Air Resources Board has been actively requesting updated information from both the Santa Barbara Airport and the Santa Maria Airport to update their methodology to make sure it's incorporating the most recent data available. So we do have numbers currently in our inventory that we could give you for the, reactive organic compounds and NOx, as well as the particulate matter, but it would be really helpful to wait until also seeing the updated methodology, because that has all the newest assumptions and
when is that expected?
it might take another year or two, unfortunately.
But I was going to reach out and see of the information we have, what value it would be in the conversation for the Santa Barbara Airport.
Sure. And this is just a footnote. In the airport, one of the issues is how do you get the planes to follow the preferred route over the ocean so there's not as much noise? And it seemed like our speed reduction incentive program might be something that could be applied in that other context. So I think they'll be contacting you about that.
Okay.
So put your thinking caps on. Is there any public comment on this item?
Chair Hartman, we did not receive any public comment on this item.
All right. May I have a motion to approve staff recommendation?
So moved.
Second, Julian.
All right, Madam Clerk.
Director Lavanino left the meeting. Director King,
Aye.
Director Clark,
Aye.
Director Perotti,
Aye.
Director Osborne,
Aye.
Director Infante,
Aye.
Director Williams also left the meeting. Director Rouse,
Aye.
Director Capps,
Aye.
Director Nelson,
Aye.
Director Julian,
Aye.
and Director Patino,
Aye.
and Chair Hartman.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
So that brings us to the close of the meeting. This meeting will be rebroadcast on Sunday, December 18th, 2022 at 5 p.m. on the County of Santa Barbara TV, Channel 20. And the Santa Barbara County Air Pollution Control District Board is adjourned to a special meeting time and date to be determined. Have a happy holiday.
Thank you.
Yeah, happy holiday, everyone.
Merry Christmas to everyone.
Holidays.